Hello and welcome to week 2. My name is Alexandra and I work at the Greek office of Greenpeace. This week we're going to explore some basic concepts about how to set your campaign, how to set your strategy, goals, objectives, and why do you need all these fancy terms before you start and get going. The first thing I want to touch is what is a campaign? A campaign is supposed to stimulate action. You do it because you want something to change. Look at examples that you're familiar with, like politicians. They do campaigns because they want our votes. Companies, they do campaigns because they want us to buy their products. Organizations and local movements do campaigns because we want to change things for the better. We want to change the future, protect the environment, protect human rights, etc.
So how do you go about setting what your campaign looks like? Imagine this as you're looking at a satellite image of a city. This is your vision. For Greenpeace, it's what we want to establish a green and peaceful future. But it's still too far away. Like, how do you go on about this? You have to zoom in a little bit, and that's where your goals come in. Your goal can still be quite broad, like stop deforestation, but it already kind of gives you an angle of where you're heading for. Still, you have to zoom in a little bit more and figure out the specific objectives. I'm going to use the word specific a lot because they have to be specific, otherwise you're going to lose track of them. A way that in many campaign organizations we try to establish what an objective is we use a system called SMART objectives. And it's not just a fancy word, the letters also signify something. It has to be specific, it has to be measurable, it has to be achievable, realistic, and time-bound. And what do all these things mean? Because perhaps at this point you're starting to feel that this is a little bit restrictive. It is and it isn't. Like, you have to focus on where you're going. How are you going to start your morning tomorrow? Who do you need to speak to and which direction you're going to head to? And the better you describe your objectives, the better you're going to be able to see if you're still on track or not. The strategy, and what is that? The strategy is like a path. Let's say you're heading from point A, which is the way that things stand right now, and you're unhappy with them. And you want to head to point B, the point where you say, okay, got it, I won, I fixed this is done, I can move on to something else. Your strategy is the road from A to B. And sometimes that road doesn't even exist. And sometimes you have to build it yourself. So how do you know what is the best way to get from point A to point B, especially if there is no way for you to take, like you don't actually see the road or nobody has opened it up for you before? This is what we call sometimes critical path. It's the best road from you to travel to. And in the next section, we're going to carry and look into some key questions of how you're going to discover what that best path is for you. For different organizations, different sizes, different people, different cultures, you're going to look for the best path for you. There's no perfect golden recipe that fits everybody. So the questions we're going to go over and get you thinking a little bit about the subject that speaks to your heart they're going to hopefully lead you into that direction. Another thing is, why do you need all these bizarre terms anyway, like objectives, goals, critical paths? They're like fancy terms. Do you really need them? Yeah, you do. You do because they're going to help you design, they're going to help you keep track of what you're doing. What they're also going to do is, if you get used to this language and this mentality, you're going to be able to communicate much easier with allies and other organizations that also communicate with these terms or similar terms. It's going to make your life a lot easier once you get started. So some key questions that you can start asking yourself of how to figure out the best road for you is, are you or your campaign part of a bigger movement? Are other organizations, other groups, other people already working on the subject? Let's take climate change, for example. There are thousands of different groups of different sizes all over the world that are working in this. So before you start, think what you're adding to this conversation, what you're adding to this much broader campaign. Here's a great example. Very recently, there have been school strikes of students in different countries, and the reason why they're on strike is because they want to stop climate change. They want to raise their voice. They know that it's coming. It's 11, 12 years ahead from now, and they're fed up with the inertia and the inaction that they're seeing from those who can make a change. So they're speaking up. This is something very different. For decades, a lot of campaigns were speaking about children. They were speaking about the future generation, but children were somewhere non-visible. They were never part of the conversation themselves, either because the time is running out or because people who are now teenagers are much better informed about these things than their counterparts 20 years ago. Teenagers and children are stepping up and they're arguing and they want this to change right now. So this is this is adding something to the conversation that did not exist before. Here's another example. In many countries in the world, there's still designs and schemes to further oil exploration, natural gas exploration, fracking, and all sorts of terrible things that all have to stop if we're going to stop climate change. We have communities, local communities. They're not campaigners, they're not organizations, just people who live there and don't want to see their lands and their rivers and their coastlines destroyed. The fact that they are rising and the fact that they can somehow find a network with each other means that every single victory we have in every single area on the planet is a victory for climate change. So think, what are you going to add to this conversation and how you can improve that? The second important question for you to ask is, who has the power to solve the problem? And no, that's not you. Who has the power to solve the problem can be politicians, they can be corporations, they can be municipalities. It's usually the people who are inactive. They have the legislative or authoritative power to do something, but they don't. And they are not going to do it unless somebody pushes them enough in the right direction. So instead of fixating in front of what is the locked door, what is the problem, forget the problem for a minute and look at who has the keys. And then look at who can influence that person with the keys. And again, that's not you necessarily. It may be, for example, for a politician. Politicians are desperate to get our votes, right? So it's not just your personal vote, but the votes of the broader community. If the community cares about this issue, they're going to demand action from the local politician. This is where you need to focus your efforts. The next thing I would like you to consider is, why is the problem still existing? Why hasn't it been solved already? It may be a bunch of different reasons. Maybe nobody else is working on it. Maybe they are and they're not very effective. Maybe not enough people are working on it, and maybe not enough voices are being heard. So this again is going to help you figure out where to inject your campaign to make things better for the broader scheme of things. One more question, and this is a really tricky one for most campaigners, is to test your own assumptions before you get going. Like, we all think that we know who is to blame, what's exactly the problem, what's happening, why are people not participating more. You can't be sure unless you start to do a little bit of research and allow yourself to be wrong, to be proven wrong. It happens every single time. We all carry our own ideas about what's happening, but we need to test them, because very often what's in our head is not what's actually happening out there. So ask questions all the time. Find as much information as you can about the subject, about who holds the power, why is the problem not solved already. Try to figure out as much as you can and use that information in your overall thinking. Here's another thing that you want to start looking into. Do people need to be educated? Do people need to be informed about the subject that you're interested in? This is an interesting conversation, and it's going to last forever probably, because we often hear about information and education campaigns. But are they really campaigns? I mean, are they really, in the sense that we discussed before, are they actually generating action? or are they just an important part of the pathway? Usually they're just that. They're just an important part of the pathway, but this is not the whole work that you need to do. So sure, when you do your research and you test your assumptions, check if people are aware of the problem. Check if they're aware of it in the correct way as well, and how you can facilitate any change. Check if people need to be educated about something. But it's much better not to stay there. So here's an example that I found out about last year, and I think it's a great way to describe how far information and education can take you. I met a guy last year when he was a student at his university. He wanted to set up a volunteer blood bank. In my country, a lot of people know already that it's important to donate blood. Very few do it. So it's not like we're not aware of the problem, but we just don't get motivated enough. So this person, he knew that, okay, he had to start talking about it with his fellow students, with his teachers, etc. But that wasn't it. That wasn't the thing that actually turned things around. So what he had to do next is he spoke with the university authorities and asked for space to be set up so students could go there and donate blood. He organized himself with professional medics and nurses that would be there at set times so people could easily do that. So instead of just informing them about the importance of giving blood or where to go in the proper structures, he brought the thing to them. He then communicated, there were posters, there were set dates, there were even text messages at the phones of the students who were keen to get involved, so they would know exactly what time to arrive at the place. This meant that out of the blue, thousands of people became blood donors, most of them for the first time ever. So what he did is essentially a full-fledged campaign. He didn't stay at the point of information. If he did, some people would have done that, but not enough. I think one more very positive thing that he did, and I want to share that with you, is that he didn't get angry when people were not involved. There's no point in getting angry with them. Instead, try a different approach. Try another way to communicate something. Try another way to involve them. Just don't get angry with them. You can't know why they're not participating unless, again, you go back into research why they're negative or just not doing anything, and try to figure out a way to get them on board. One more thing that you can look at is there a solution to the problem that you're trying to solve or stop? Look, you don't have to know the solution. There doesn't have to be a solution. But if there is, and if you know about it, it's usually far more effective to start speaking about it. People are really fed up with being told what not to do. They're really fed up by being given miserable, bad news. It always helps the conversation. It always helps things to move forward if you can provide even a small idea of how there can be a solution. If you don't know it yourself, again, look around, go back to your research. Is there somebody who is providing a solution, even a small part of a solution? It's going to make things a lot simpler. If there isn't, fine, it's fine. This should not stop you. This should never stop you from going ahead with your campaign. Just make sure that you got this covered when you're asking yourself how to go ahead. And the last bit I want to touch is allies. Okay, we asked ourselves a little bit before who has the power to solve the problem. Now this is the time to ask who can join my cause. Both of these are going to go into power analysis tools that you're going to cover in the future. But for now, start mapping out who may be keen to join you. Look at it this way, it may help you. Who is the victim of the situation as it stands now? Because maybe these are the people who want to come forward and join an alternative day, a day where this problem doesn't exist. Maybe it's people because they feel good about what you do, they have time, they have resources to spare with you. Just look around, be very open about who that can be. And here's where I'm going to link it with a little bit with the solution side. About 10 years ago, Greece was hit with a very heavy financial crisis. sure, people cared about the environment, but all of a sudden they have to really focus on very deep personal problems that they were facing. People were losing their jobs, they couldn't afford to pay their mortgage, they were generally very, very worried. So that didn't mean they stopped caring about their environment, it meant that other more pressing issues were standing right in front of them, and they just couldn't do both. So we felt that we had to change our campaigns as well. We had to adapt to this reality. There was no point in saying, okay, let's stop climate change and let's stop fossil fuels only. We had to start looking, how can we help the environment, how can we help our own campaigns, and also help our society around us get over a problem that was not caused by any of us, but still stands as an obstacle. So we started shifting, for example, the communication we had around the climate change issue. We started talking about renewables. We started looking and pushing forward for legislation that would encourage people to use renewables, because that would save them money. So we were addressing a problem that they had for another reason, also tackling the environmental problem at the same time. Another example that we tried to do was, we had a very long-standing campaign on oceans and fisheries, and we were trying to keep protected areas and remove some of the most destructive fishing methods out of those areas. But what did that mean for a person in a city who felt quite desperate about other things in their life? What then we did is we started working with small-scale fishermen. They use the least problematic fishing methods. They are very remote. They were not even knowing each other. They had no way to communicate with each other, and definitely they had no way to sell their fish to people who wanted to do something more sustainable. So we tried to get a little bit of a better organization between the fishermen, and then to get the consumers involved. So this kind of changed the balance of the conversation. It wasn't anymore about some abstract overfishing campaign. It was very, it was touching on the daily situations, both for the fishermen and for the consumers themselves. One thing I want to add regarding approaching allies or potential allies is how you can communicate to them about what you're trying to do. And it's very, very frequent. I think it links a little bit back to what we were saying about assumptions, but it's very frequent that when we try to get people on board our campaign, that we speak to them about our language, the things that we care about. And this is not always the case. So before you approach somebody, and especially if they turn you down and then you get very, very angry with them, try to think, what is it that they care about? So the examples I was giving before is examples of people who are quite desperate, quite confused about their daily reality. They didn't stop caring, they just couldn't afford to. So we had to invent a way, we had to figure out a way of how to get two things done at the same time. We had to find a way also to speak to them in a way that they appreciated, in a way that they cared about. So always try to have that somewhere at the back of your mind. Don't speak to them about yourself or about your values or about you care. Try to approach them, because what you ultimately want them is to join your campaign. You don't want them to turn into you. So let's say you've done all these things, right? You've asked all these questions, you've mapped everything out, so what now? A lot of campaigners are experiencing that point. It's very similar to stage fright. It's like when a singer or actor doesn't want to get on stage, no matter how well prepared they are. I had stage fright before I started this video, but here I am doing it anyway, so this is what I'm suggesting that you do as well. At some point, you're going to get as ready as you're ever going to be, and you have to take the leap of faith. You have to start. Like a lot of campaigners, I've felt that myself. They're going to say, "Ooh, I don't have enough money. I don't have enough allies. I don't have enough information." You have to start. You have to get going, because otherwise, you're going to really hate yourself for not doing something and letting time go by, and the problem still being there. So yeah. Put all your ideas, put all your effort in practice, and get going on that road. Here's another thing I want to discuss about that I personally have found very few times in campaign manuals or campaign trainings. I've been to several of them. And every single one of them tries to teach you, of course, how to run a successful campaign. But what if something goes wrong, right? Like sometimes people never tell you how to handle failure or how to handle changes that are completely irrelevant to your campaign. Like I was saying before, my country was hit by a financial crisis completely irrelevant to our campaigns, but we had to deal with it anyway. So how do you incorporate that failure? It's usually a taboo. People don't want to talk about their failures. They want to hide them and carry on their lives. What I'm going to suggest now is that you don't do that. There was a TV show, maybe you've heard about it. It was called Mythbusters. And one of the messages that was really popularized through this show is that failure is always an option. Yes, it is. It's going to happen no matter what you do, because things keep changing, and especially if you're running a successful campaign, things are going to start moving around. The politician that you're targeting may change their opinion. So the whole thing is shifting. And while it's shifting, you may start missing things, or other situations may arise that you haven't had calculated in before, but now you have to take them into consideration. So it's okay to fail, right? It really is. And what you can do is, okay, you can be sad for a little bit, but then what you really need to do is start looking at why did this happen. There's an organization, they're called Engineers Without Borders. I found out about them a couple of years ago. I had no idea they existed. And I also had no idea that they're doing one of the coolest things I've ever heard in my life. They produced a failures report and they publish it. And they're very open and very transparent about it, because this is how they feel that they're going to learn and become better at what they do. And they're also helping others become better at what they do as well. So don't shy away from failure. Put it in the context of your strategy. If you're going in your direction, every problem that you face, every obstacle that you face, or every mistake that you yourself may make is a useful information to recalibrate your strategy, to find your way again and move on. So we covered a bunch of things. We've covered how you can specify your objectives, how you can figure out the best pathway by asking yourself questions. And you will have the opportunity to test the skills, the new skills that you have, or if you already have them, to improve them a little bit through the exercise this week. The last thing I want to say is that, and I heard it from a campaigner that I work with, and I really, really like that. It's campaigns, when they start, they're living beings. Like I was saying before, when you start your work, things start moving around you. It's like if you're trying to set a puzzle on the table and all the pieces get up and walk around. And that's a normal thing. That's a very, very normal thing, because people are going to react to what you're doing. So take joy in that and rock on to your campaigns. Bye from Alexandra from Greece.